Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a whole pile of sources, articles, expert notes that all seem to point to, well, a pretty chilling conclusion about the United Kingdom.
Which is that governance has basically failed.
Exactly. And it's a feeling that goes, way beyond just London. It feels like it resonates everywhere.
That's really the hook, isn't it? This
Mhm.
pervasive sense you see in the U.S. and Great Britain that nothing really changes.
Right.
You can vote for the Tories, you can vote for Labour, but the ship just stays on the same course. And our sources argue this isn't stability, it's stagnation,
Mm.
a deep failure of modern democracy.
Which raises such a fundamental question. If Britain is supposed to be the mother of all parliaments, the blueprint, how did it get to a place where its own elected members feel irrelevant?
Well, you have to look at the contrast. I mean, historically, as the sources remind us, MPs were really invested.
They had skin in the game.
Skin in the game, exactly. They were landowners, businessmen. They had, a big shareholding in UK play. And the mission was to think about the national interest long term.
But that's a world away from the system being described today. The sources, when you analyze them, they paint this picture of Parliament as a dying remnant,
Yeah, and the critique is that the role of an MP has become a career.
not a public service.
No, it's professional careerism. We're talking about a salary of, around £92,000 a year. And for many, that creates a dependence on the job itself.
So keeping the job becomes more important than doing the job.
That's the allegation.
Hmm.
You prioritize party politics, obedience, anything to keep that status and income over actually delivering for your constituents.
So the elected body becomes, I guess, disconnected. But if the politicians are, for all intents and purposes, irrelevant, where's the actual power?
It's in the unelected state. It's in this huge, unaccountable bureaucracy. The real power base, according to this critique, is with the quangos, these quasi-non-governmental organizations, and the career civil servants, specifically the permanent secretaries.
And these are the top administrators in each department. Unelected, permanent.
That's it. They run things behind the scenes. So the goal outlined in our sources is to force a confrontation, to achieve a rejuvenation and uplift by re-empowering the elected MPs.
And disempowering the bureaucracy.
Yeah, and the cost of not doing it is, well, it's immense. It's economic decline. The sources say the system of excessive regulation, red tape, crushing taxes, it's just doomed to failure.
Why doom?
Because the whole structure, as they put it, is designed to debit the productive and credit the indolent. It punishes work and rewards dependency. And you see that failure most clearly in the City of London.
Okay, that brings us to the economy. The claim here is that London's financial sector, which was once this global powerhouse, the Eurobond market and so on, is now a shadow of its former self.
It's a huge assertion, I know.
It feels counterintuitive. I mean, it's still London. So what went wrong, according to them?
In a word, overregulation. They point to one specific moment, the Financial Services Market Act of 2000, FSMA 2000. They say that's when the city was tied down and essentially strangled.
But isn't regulation supposed to protect people?
It is, yes, but at what cost? The argument is that FSMA created such high compliance costs, and it shifted the focus so heavily towards just protecting pensions and minimizing risk.
That stopped doing its main job.
Exactly. It stopped performing its most vital function, matching risk capital with entrepreneurs. It just got too expensive and too complex to fund innovative, high-risk ideas. So the smart money, the entrepreneurs, they went elsewhere.
So it's not that the city stopped being busy, but it stopped creating future growth. This actually connects to that older theory from figures like Jim Goldsmith, right?
It really does. Goldsmith argued that when the UK outsourced all its manufacturing to cheaper countries, it wasn't just losing jobs.
It was losing innovation.
It was losing the capacity for innovation, because that tends to happen where things are actually being made. And this, the sources say, pushed Britain from being an inventive nation to a dependency culture.
A culture based on consumption and debt. And speaking of debt, let's get into the numbers because they are genuinely shocking. Officially, national debt is about 100% of GDP.
Which is already high. But the sources call the government's accounting system delusional.
Delusional.
They call it Oscar II. And the claim is it just massively understates the real liabilities. The hidden time bomb is the civil service pension liability.
Okay.
These are promises made to government workers. They're estimated to be somewhere between 3 and 5 trillion pounds.
Wait, hold on. 3 to 5 trillion. What does that actually mean?
It means that if that were on the books properly, The UK's national debt could be over 200% of GDP,
So the total debt is twice the value of everything the UK produces in a year.
and it's just sitting there, off the books. That, they argue, is completely delusional, and it raises the risk of a funding crisis. If lenders stop buying UK government debt, the gilts.
It could be a collapse, like the 1970s.
Absolutely. The deficit is out of control. And the burden for all this, for the debt, for this dependency, it falls on the taxpayer.
Which brings us to welfare. The sources point to 9 million working-age people who aren't contributing. And they use some really specific examples to make their case.
They do. The one that stands out is the Motability Scheme.
What's that?
It's a program where if you qualify, the taxpayer basically buys you a brand new car every 3 years, insurance included. Now, it's designed for disabled people, but the sources allege it's just riddled with abuse.
So they see it as part of a system that favors, as they put it, the indolent.
Yes. The interviewee even said the country itself is basically a fraud when you look at all these layers. And the fear is it gets worse.
You mean with a potential new government?
They're very concerned about Rachel Reeves, the shadow chancellor. The sources describe her as a mix of arrogance and ignorance.
And the specific fear is?
That she'll lift the two-child benefit cap. The critique is simple. You're asking a family that works hard and can only afford 2 kids to pay more tax to fund much larger families on welfare. It's described as completely ass-about-face.
Totally backward. Okay, so if the domestic economy is in this state, how does mass migration, according to the sources, add to the pressure?
They draw a very, very sharp distinction. They say targeted immigration, bringing in doctors, engineers for skill shortages, that's good.
But that's not what's happening.
No. What they say is happening is hundreds of thousands of economic migrants are being allowed in, including a heavy focus on the illegal ones who pass through multiple safe countries to get to the UK.
And the social consequence
is a lack of integration. The argument is that these new arrivals often don't integrate into Britain's, historical or cultural roots, and you get these growing pools of people from a different culture, which creates friction.
And while this is happening, you also have a brain drain.
Yes. You combine the high taxes, the regulation, the cultural shifts, and the country's rainmakers. The entrepreneurs, the high net worth individuals, they're leaving.
Where are they going?
Dubai, Milan, Montenegro. Places with lower taxes and less red tape. They don't have to be in London, and the system is actively pushing them out.
And this idea of the elite working against the national interest, it's all kind of crystallized in this Chagos Islands case, isn't it?
It really is. It's a complex story, but it's used to show the mindset. So the Chagos Islands are strategically vital, home to the Diego Garcia military base.
Right.
Decades ago, the inhabitants were moved. More recently, human rights lawyers launched what the sources call a legal fantasy to get a massive settlement.
They're the result of that.
A payout to Mauritius estimated at between 18 and 30 billion pounds over 90 years.
Billions.
And what did Mauritians do with the money? They gave their own citizens a tax cut.
So a country that's supposedly on the verge of bankruptcy is subsidizing another country's tax cuts.
That's the claim. And it's driven, they say, by an elite that has a deep hatred of colonial Britain, even while admitting Britain often did good things, like ending the slave trade. It's institutional self-loathing.
Which would also explain why a country in so much debt is still spending so much on overseas aid.
Exactly. They cite sending 130 million pounds a year to Pakistan. It makes no fiscal sense.
This all leads to probably the most disturbing part of the analysis, the erosion of basic freedom, specifically free speech.
The state overreach they describe is, well, it's extreme. We have this statistic that thousands of people are arrested every year in the UK for saying naughty words on social media.
And there's a very sharp example of this, the case of Lucy Conley.
Yes, she was jailed for over 30 weeks. For a social media post about migrants after the Southport killings, a post she deleted very quickly.
Jailed for a deleted post. Now, you contrast that with the experience of the MP in one of the sources.
He received 8 death threats in 3 months, reported them all directly to the police.
And what happened?
The square root of nothing. No action. No investigation. The system seems hypersensitive to ideological slights, but completely inert when it comes to actual threats against politicians.
And this all culminates in that really chilling personal story about the MP having his guns confiscated.
His legally held guns, yes. He was triggered by false political witness statements claiming he'd made threats and had early onset dementia.
But here's the key point, right?
The critical point. His property was taken without a conviction, without a trial, with no recourse at all.
That's the definition of statism in practice. Small, unelected people making huge, malign decisions behind closed doors.
And the sources say this creates a sort of Soviet-style environment where, to survive, you have to be a very good liar. Because the state can just take your rights based on an allegation, truth and responsibility just, they break down.
Okay, so let's just try to synthesize all of this. We have a political class that's become disconnected, an economic system drowning in hidden debt, and an elite that seems to be dismantling individual liberty.
It's a three-pronged crisis, really. Stagnation, delusion, and erosion.
Mm.
But the final layer in these sources takes it from a UK problem to a global one.
And this is what's so fascinating. They note that this pattern of policy failure, especially on mass migration and this sort of institutional inertia, it's almost identical across the US, the UK, Ireland, Australia, Canada.
The synchronization is precise, and the policies are things the electorates in all those countries explicitly say they don't want.
So this is where the analysis goes into some pretty provocative territory.
It does. The sources speculate this isn't an accident. They suggest it's linked to a malign agenda from a small global elite, and they name groups like the World Economic Forum the Bilderbergers.
Arguing that they want to break down national communities to exert more central control, we have to report that the sources are very confident in this view. And that really brings us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. If the outcomes of governance across so many Western democracies are identical, high debt, welfare dependency, mass migration, and if those outcomes are consistently the opposite of what the people say they want, can we still assume that those outcomes are the organic products of democracy? Something to think about.